Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was created by TJ, who's an advanced photographer from Texas. TJ recently created this image for the Mindful Eye's long exposure community assignment. TJ shot this with a Canon 5D Mark II super wide angle lens and exposed the file at ISO 100 and f16 for 30 seconds. The assignment was to shoot an exposure of 30 seconds or longer, so TJ's used a low ISO, small aperture, and 6 stops of neutral density here to get to 30 seconds. One of the things that I'll say to photographers that they ask me about how much neutral density they should carry, I'll say in a perfect world, it'd be great if you have as much as 10 stops of neutral density. And this particular scenario is a good example of why I say 10 stops. TJ stopped his lens down to the point here, f16, where he's going to be getting quite a bit of diffraction. And if he had 2 or 3 or 4 more stops of neutral density, he could have shot the same effective exposure, 30 seconds, at an aperture of something like f11 or f8, which might have been overall a little more sharp. Just something to think about without going into a full-blown discussion of neutral density filters. So many things that I like about this image, and one of the first things I wanted to mention as a takeaway from the video today is TJ makes us aware in the backstory about this image that it was shot very near where he lives in a metropolitan area, so just a little sort of slice of nature and wilderness in a local park. I love that part of the backstory. It's so easy for us as photographers to get destination oriented and really sort of wait to turn on with our camera, until we get to the quote-unquote location. Somewhere that is supposedly a great place for photography. And this image to me is just sort of a great clarion call to see all of the time with more of a sense of wonder. One of the things I love about photography is that it really does give us the potential to be more connected to our life, which is what is happening right now. It can be really hard to stay with things like that. There's so much going on in the way that we've sort of chosen to live culturally, where we spend a lot of time scheduling and worrying about what's next and all those kinds of things. But this image to me is just a big wake-up call to just look around. You could just be in the room where you are now with your computer and pick your camera up and look with a sense of wonder and really just see and open your eyes instead of waiting until you get to the next national park. Big takeaway on that level. One of the things that I enjoy too about this image is what the long exposure has done here. It's definitely changed the way that we would see this. It's clearly softened the texture on the water. One of the things TJ mentioned that surprised him about the long exposure here is that he said the water seemed very, very muddy when you were looking at it. But in this very long exposure, where all the contrast and texture smooths out on the water, what's going to happen is you're going to start to get a lot more reflected color, and that muddiness will go away. And I learned that way back in the beginning of my advertising career. We had 3 weeks of rain. I think in 92 or 93, something like that, we had a huge flood in Georgia, and I had a job where I needed to get a river shot. And I finally started going out in very, very low light and doing these crazy long 10-minute exposures. And it really learned a lot about not only how that affects the texture of the water, but it really does start to allow the camera to see all of this reflected color, and just changes the way the color looks on the surface of the water in a real dramatic way. And you're seeing that here, and it's really beautiful to see the reflected greens and sort of golds from the rocks come in and become an overlay over the muddy that we might see. Really beautiful qualities of line here. I love how close TJ's gotten to the rock in the foreground, and they're just some really beautiful, simple, elegant lines that are moving me in a dynamic way. Either undulating or implied diagonals that are really beautiful. There's a really beautiful sense of the water in a subtle way, making this dramatic shape. And these dynamic qualities of line help to just continue to move me through the whole image. Another thing that I love about this image, TJ says he shot this on a very clear day, and that this whole area was mostly in heavy shade, with the exception of a little bit of light coming through in some places. And I love this sort of spotlight effect and how that's helping to make this image very dynamic. Perfect world, in a perfect world variation for this image, this part over in here to me is very different than the rest of the image, and so much of it has to do with a texture change. This is an area that has a lot of texture, but it's very simple to me. And it's so interesting when we start to think about the way things can possibly tie together. Even though the texture changes here, it harmonizes with the dominant color that's in the rest of the image. And over here, what happens for me is you have the texture and you have a little bit of green and some yellow and some gray, and all of a sudden colors are jumping around quite a bit, textures jumping around quite a bit. It's warm in some respects overall if you just kind of blur your eyes, so it becomes very visually heavy and comes forward instead of the green that's sort of calming and receding. This area of the image really starts to compete heavily with everything else that's over here that's a lot more smooth. Is very, very different. Same thing back here. It just starts to make me think about a crop. Before I ever crop, if I'm saying, I need to lose some things, I can look at this image and think, well, it's not just a matter of cropping from one side. I'm going to need to crop from two sides. So that means I may need to crop from the top and from the side. If I crop all the way over to get rid of this real strong texture here, then I'm going to be coming over to somewhere like this. So I'm not going to have this information to work with anymore. And if I crop down from the top to get rid of this highly textured information, then it may look something like that. And then as I'm thinking about cropping, I'll start to look at, well, now what is going to become my main subject if I crop? And to me, this is going to become one of the main ideas, and that's going to affect how I edit the rest of the image. I'm going to hit C for the crop tool. I am going to crop this over from the side to about right here, and then I'm going to come down from the top to about right here and crop like that. And now that I'm feeling like this subject is one of the main ideas where the spotlight comes in, because this is the area now that is the most different than everything else. And I start to think about how can I sort of accentuate that and help to tie it together with the rest of the image. And for me, I see darkening this quite a bit. So this feels like more of a spotlight. I see this really beautiful repetition of sort of this shape that can rhyme with this in a general sense. This also rhymes with it. And then there's an implication of a shape in here in the water that can rhyme with this general idea if we think about an implied energy. And I feel like if I darken this area in here and this area a little bit and darken in here a little bit, I can start to tie together sort of these three main areas in a more dramatic way. Let's just go to curves to do that. And in this case, I can see where most of the pixels are stacked up, so I'm going to pull from there. And as I pull down, boy, I like that quite a bit. I'm going to overdo it just a little bit, and then I'm going to go back to layers. This has had a big dramatic effect on color. I think I want to do this change in luminosity blending mode, so I'm just making it darker. The colors are already pretty vibrant to begin with. And there's the change there. I'm going to fill the mask with black. I'm going to hit B for the brush key. In this case, I'm going to get a really big brush, and I'm going to start at a fairly healthy opacity for me. I like to start at real low opacities and build up changes to a mask because I know I'm going to apply a fair amount of this change to a big portion of the image. I'm going to go ahead and get a big brush like this, 30% opacity by hitting the 3 key, and I'm going to go ahead and darken sort of the whole image some. Now what I'm going to do is create more of a vignetting mask. This corner is already dark, this is already dark, this is dark. I'm going to darken by choosing 10% opacity, getting a decent sized brush, and I'm going to paint in this corner and coming around the top here and go ahead and help to contain the eye by applying quite a bit of the change of our adjustment layer to that corner. And that's the work that we've done so far. I could come in here to try and create more of a feeling of form, to darken these areas in here and kind of tie this together and make that white area come out a little bit more. And I'm going to do that. I could kind of push in here around the area that's white. I could darken right down in there. And I could darken right in here. Just continue to try and move the idea of form. I'm going to get a bigger brush now. I talked about darkening this area, and I am going to darken that a little bit. I'm going to get a bigger brush now that I've kind of biased that area and hit this out in here and make it a little bit darker. This is where we started, and this is where we ended up. Now I really get the sense that this is a main subject, and the spotlight's coming down, and these other areas are sort of unified and tie together with it. Would love to hear what you think about the work that we did today. Huge thank you to TJ for sharing this beautiful image with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique. Big thank you to all of you for being here. Hope to see you again real soon on the Mindful Eye.